Commence primary ignition.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
What a piece of junk.
Enterprise, this is the captain.
I have a bad feeling about this.
It's all part of the plan.
Engage.
Welcome back to Podcast 2 for 1. I'm your host, Donovan Thompson, with my co-host,
Daniel Wingfield.
And today is episode 167 of Podcast 2 for 1, youtube.com/2 for 1 studios, the best place to consume the content. And if you didn't know, listeners, and let's be honest, you probably didn't, we are sponsored by Kapow Comics, located at 4047 East Kill Avenue in Sherwood, Arkansas. There they have comic books, collectibles, graphic novels, and of course, special guest appearances throughout the year.
Kapow.
Kapow. Daniel, we haven't done a retrospective review in a very long time.
It's true. It's true.
And listeners, if you're just like driving in your car and you were listening to some other superior, more followed podcast, and then all of a sudden it ended, and then your new podcast came on, it's Podcast 2 for 1, and you didn't check to see what the title was, we are talking not about the new Indiana Jones movie, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. That comes later.
But you're seeing that later today, right?
Oh, yeah, baby. Oh, yes.
Yeah, this is a nice little time capsule of like before your life is over, or maybe
before the dark
life
times
has begun. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah.
I know it can be a problem. Depending tomorrow how I respond to you in text can be like, is Donovan depressed? Is Donovan what's
giving up
Donovan?
on movies as an art? I don't know. Yeah.
It could be. But listeners, we're not talking about the so far what appears to be critically divisive fifth and final installment of Harrison Ford's 10 years as a character. We are talking about the fourth installment, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Came out in 2008, so roughly 15 years ago. I was 15 when it came out, or I was 15 turning 16 when it came out. And we've never really, real quick, Daniel, I sent you a text earlier this week. I said, oh yeah, we're doing Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And you said, yeah, I need to rewatch it. And I was like, rewatch it? I thought you never saw it. So you've seen this before.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I watched it on TV even. So I may not have seen the complete cut because sometimes they cut some stuff out for runtime. But yeah, no, I had seen it. And I didn't hate it. You know what I mean? Like I didn't come away from it thinking like, wow, that was a really bad movie that just wasn't exciting or fun or satisfying. But yeah, no, but I also wasn't like, I still could tell it wasn't at the level of the first three. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah. Now, what's your relationship with Indiana Jones? And then I'll tell the brief version.
Yeah,
of that.
I mean, Indiana Jones was introduced to me shortly after Star Wars, and it was kind of like the next kind of big franchisey thing that I got into. I remember watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I almost wonder if my parents were cooler with me watching it because it has these very like strong biblical themes, and like the way the Raiders of the Lost Ark is, it's very biblically accurate to the artifacts, at least how they're described in the Bible. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. But I remember being pretty young when watching those movies and just, loved them. Like I remember as a kid, we did a little like spoof movie. My dad had like a VHS camera, and this was like probably late 90s, early 2000s, but like you just put a VHS in and recorded to the VHS. And we made like an Indiana Daniel spoof by just like our cuts were just in camera cuts. Like we would just stop the recording. Right. And then so there was no second takes, you know what I'm saying? It was just like, and then, but yeah, no, like Indiana Jones, the whip, he was just so fucking cool. Harrison Ford, like I love Han Solo, but there's something about Indiana Jones that maybe it's because he's American, maybe because he's fighting Nazis, maybe it's because it feels a little more closer to real life, but I love Indiana Jones. I think it's probably some of the best action adventure films we've ever had. Especially, I'd say those first three. So
that's kind of fascinating to me because I don't think we've ever talked about Indiana Jones before.
Not much, no.
Which is really weird.
Which it hasn't really been a topic in the zeitgeist. Since 2008, I guess.
For 15 years, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's kind of wild because for me, I'm I too am like, I'm a huge fan of this franchise.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, Bruce Hutchinson, when we had our good friend, Dr. Bruce Hutchinson, our good
Yeah.
friend, when we were in film school, I think we asked him what his favorite actor was, and he said Harrison Ford.
Mm.
And that kind of always stuck with me that he said that. And, I just kind of started going back and just deep dive into all his movies, and which I do regularly anyway.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, I do love Harrison. Outside of Indiana Jones, I
Yeah.
do love Harrison Ford. And it's one of those situations too where you kind of forget, just looking through his catalog, you're like, oh, all these banger movies. And then you're like, wait a minute, he's also Han Solo and Indiana Jones. Like, it's not like he's got one mega character. He's got two mega characters, which is a kind of a really big deal. But for me, Indiana Jones, I remember watching Raiders of the Lost Ark when I was really young. And I just love you know me, Daniel, and hopefully our listeners know me by now, that I'm a huge fan of like the swashbuckling adventure. Movies like The Phantom, Rocketeer. Like I miss that genre so much. Like a great modern example is Pirates of the Caribbean.
And that's not even really modern anymore.
It's not modern.
At least the original good ones, the original three.
True. True. And so I just have a huge place for this franchise in my heart. And I obsess over these movies. Like, I'm constantly revisiting them at least once a year. And I'm always watching behind the scenes of like retrospectives, other people's opinions on them, what they like. And I've seen Raiders in theaters. I've seen Temple of Doom in theaters. I've seen Crystal Skull in theaters. I have not seen Last Crusade in theaters, unfortunately, not yet. I haven't had the opportunity yet. But I love the franchise. I could keep going on about it. But I remember going in when I was 15 to go watch Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And I was super excited for this movie. I feel like over the years, these last 15 years, I've become spoilers, everybody, I've become a Kingdom of the Crystal Skull apologist. That's what I've become.
Sure.
And I totally can sit there and look at the first three and then look at the fourth one and just see that difference just based on technology and just time period and all these things. But then, I think even more so, just rewatching it again recently and then looking at other movies that are coming out, like these Marvel films, which I am even a bigger fan of. Maybe, I don't know. I feel like Indiana Jones and Star Wars almost sometimes live on a different plane that you don't talk about, because
it's like nostalgia. It's like, because I think it's so tied to our childhood and like our development, like emotionally and mentally. I feel like it'll always be there, even if I'm like kind of more into a different IP in the moment. Those are always there. You know what I mean? Like, it's just they'll never go away. Yeah.
Well, I think part of it too is, it's like Back to the Future is a good example. It's like sometimes you're ranking your favorite stuff. You're like, oh yeah, here's my favorite things. Well, not Back to the Future. Like, it's still number one. But if I could, because like nothing can trump it, right? Like, it's just like it's perfect. It's like it's like a perfect little thing, and you're like, they just did everything right. The stars aligned for them. All these kind of things. Indiana Jones, specifically for me. I mean, I do like Temple of Doom a lot. There's a lot of love about that movie, but Raiders and Last Crusade are just like God tier. They're like, that's pinnacle. It's like, if you could do those, you did it as a filmmaker, then you could retire, then you'd be fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Spielberg done it twice, and with just that franchise. And so I think I've become an apologist for Crystal Skull, because if you look now at some of these other movies, there is so much well-made choreography, shot composition, like, I mean, like, Spielberg still has it. People are like, oh, it's not the same. I'm like, no, it's really really well done. It's still really smart.
And I will say I was struck by how filmic this movie. It's like all classical lighting. Dude,
it's 100%. Yeah, it's Kaminsky.
And then I didn't realize how much I missed. Like it, and you could tell like it was shot on film. Like, it looked like it, at least to me. Like, it had that kind of nice film grain. Maybe it was digital and they added the grain, but it looked nice and filmic. But yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I think, to me, watching this, it still feels so Spielbergian. You know what I mean?
Oh,
I think, just top level thoughts. I think there is some maybe more silliness in the plot a little bit with Crystal Skull. And that I think is where I know a lot of the critique comes down to some of those things. In particular, like
sure.
the surviving a nuclear blast in a fridge kind of things, right?
Yeah.
And like, it doesn't bother me as much as most people, but I also concede it is a little bit wilder than the things that maybe happened in the first films. I don't know. I think this film to me, it feels so classical in a lot of ways, and I think in some ways I maybe enjoyed it because of that, because I think I am unfortunately really used to these like high budget multi-million-dollar green screen films that are cool and fun, but like really lack some of the more finer, delicate cinematography and like intentional blocking. And like, I loved how many giant group shots there were. The camera would spin and there's just a giant group, but like that just feels so like film and like hot, like classical Hollywood, Yeah. And I do think, top level, I think like the plot isn't as good as the first three for me. I just don't find it as interesting based on just what it is about. And also, I think it isn't quite as smooth of a ride, probably, as those first three films, just in terms of pacing and how we get there and stuff, for me. But at the end of the day, it's still a really fun, swashbuckling Indiana Jones film. And you made this comment maybe a few months ago, but like, compared to this new movie, and we're just in the trailers, Harrison Ford looks so young and spry.
He does. Isn't that wild?
And just like when he's doing things with the whip, it's like, okay, yeah, that would probably really be hard for someone that age, but I don't like, it's not impossible for me to believe you couldn't do it at this age.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm a little worried about what's going to happen in the next one. And it's going to be like flashbacks of The Irishman with like 80-year-old Robert De Niro pretending to beat someone else up on the side of the road. And it's just so clearly an old man who can't throw a punch anymore.
Well, I've seen quite a, like, I was like, this is the best de-aging ever. And then I saw like a screen grab last week. And I was like, oh, like this one shot looked really bad.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no, it makes me like sick to my stomach thinking about it. Like just, I don't want none of these things to fail or to, because in my head I build them up so high. But and sidebar, Secret Invasion, they just de-aged Samuel Jackson in episode 2, which I'm not sure you've seen it, but it was on par. It was maybe slightly less than Captain Marvel, just because they don't have that budget, I think, or time restraint also. And also just, we know VFX are just dipping with all these companies right now. But I still like, damn, okay, maybe Samuel Jackson still has it. Like, he's the one.
Yeah.
Because he just, that movie, he looks good. That whole Captain Marvel, like, that's a really impressive de-aging.
It is.
But yes, I think I rank Crystal Skull right above Temple of Doom, just for rewatchability for me. I think so. I think so. And I've seen Temple of Doom the least. Okay. I enjoy it quite a bit, but I think it's a little darker. I love Short Round. I love the opening. I love some of the other things in it, but I don't know. I think I have more fun with Crystal Skull overall, but
it's a lighter story, I would think. You're not,
definitely lighter. Yeah.
Like clawing into a man's chest and ripping out their heart and drinking the blood. So yeah. Which as a kid, I think I still loved it just because it was so dark and it was like kind of scary.
It's great.
Kind of like, it was free. And plus there was a lot of kids in the story. Like there was a bunch of children highly involved in the plot. So I think even as a kid, it felt like even maybe slightly more relatable as a kid, because you've got all these kind of like children.
Short Round going on.
And then all the kids in like that becomes a heavy part of like the plot is like all the children that are at the temple doing shit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And we've seen that. It's funny because I just remember this. We've seen that scene with the conveyor belt in film school so many times. Like temporal cutting and stuff like that. Right. But I think the mine shafts scene in Temple of Doom is incredible. And and if you played Resident Evil 4, it just came out earlier this year, there's a whole section that is absolutely based off
That's cool.
Temple of Doom, which is it's amazing. It's like probably it's one of the coolest game sequences I've seen in a long time.
That's awesome.
But I think overall, yes, back real quick, it was. I remember it being 15 and thinking, oh man, Harrison Ford is a little older now, and I have this weird thing that like I kind of wanted 2 more movies at that age of him because like I have a weird thing of like having 3 movies where he looks one way and then 1 movie where he looks another way. Like I don't know what it is about my brain or continuity or something. Like it's even with like Die Hard. He had 3 movies when he had hair, and then he has 2 movies where he didn't have hair. And I'm like, oh, there's the bald era and the hair era.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I need 1 more movie as a bald era. That way it balances out. Like I'm like a psychopath like that. But yes, in turn now he looks like, oh yeah, he looks much younger now, especially considering where he's at now. I think he's like 78 now.
Yeah.
But overall,
yeah,
I think the directing's great.
Fantastic.
I think the performances are good. And and Shia LaBeouf,
I really enjoyed him.
I kind of was annoyed by him at first when I was younger, but as I've grown watching it, I really enjoy it still.
To me, this is prime era. Unless, I mean, who knows? Maybe Shia will have a renaissance at some point. But like, this is his prime era of role. I mean, this is like right around Transformers.
Yeah,
like he kind of had this perfect like.
Transformers the year before.
He's eager. He's kind of young, but he's confident. And I thought he did really well. I liked his like. I just liked how they presented him in this movie. I thought he was a fun character and added a fun element. You know what I mean? The whole father-son thing at times feels a little forced or like at the end when he's like don't wander, like can't remember the line, but he's like, don't go off anywhere, Junior, and he's like, well, why didn't you stay around, Dad? Or like this kind of like it was like played as kind of like a wholesome, and it just felt a little corny, you know what I mean? And I think that to me, I think maybe goes to one of my biggest, I don't know, takeaways from this film is, I think the feelings of corniness or the feelings of silliness that I sometimes get from it may just be that this is a genre of film that doesn't really exist anymore.
That's why.
And that there was a different expectation of movies in the 80s and in the 90s. There was a different kind of, okay, it's magical and whimsical and it doesn't always make sense, but it's fine because it's a fun action-y thing. And we're not thinking too hard about it kind of thing, right?
Yeah, it's a fantasy.
And I think that in some ways it just reminded me of like, okay, like movies aren't like this. Like even fantasy movies aren't really like this anymore. And maybe it is, it feels like these days, I mean, I know Marvel and DC are set in the real world, but like we don't get as many, maybe, and this is just anecdotal, maybe I'm wrong. It doesn't feel like we get as many, we're in the real world, and then we get a little bit of fantasy injected in. It feels like we're either full on fantasy, full on different universe, superheroes, or it's just a real people in a real life kind of thing. Maybe I don't know. It feels like, it feels like the silliness that I'm feeling probably wouldn't have been felt if this movie was made 3 years after Temple of Doom and it had the same plot and kind of same thing. Because I think if Temple of Doom, if if those movies came out like today, I don't think they would be as well received as they were when they came out originally. I just think it's not the hot kind of movie in Hollywood right now, in my opinion. Like these kind of, like we don't get as many classical films, and I feel like the classical movie star fantasy action movie is just rare. You know what I mean? Like maybe you could throw in like,
it's unique. It's a unique
The Jungle,
situation.
that one with like The Rock and is it Emily Blunt?
Jungle Cruise.
Jungle Cruise is kind of maybe in that area, but The Rock,
I love Jungle Cruise.
Yeah, but it's also probably not the same. Jungle Cruise seems sillier than, like, it's more comedy.
Maybe to me that's the best Indiana Jones movie we've had in 10 years because it's like the only one we've had.
Sure.
I love that. It's my top 5 that year just because I love that kind of genre. Like I love that genre. The Mummy is like the best Indiana Jones ripoff ever. The first movie with Brendan Fraser. That movie fucking slaps.
It is. I mean, like, and I think who knows with the Brendan Fraser Renaissance? I feel like we're gonna get another Mummy at some point with him in it.
Let
just
me
feels like
direct it. I
impossible.
want to direct it. Please let me direct
But
it.
yeah, I think you're right. Like those movies were even darker, than the Indiana Jones movie, and like
Oh
I don't
yeah.
know, they got to much scarier, like crazy places. I still can remember the beetles that like crawl under people's skin and
Oh
like
man, we need to
kill
do
them in
a
I guess the first
retrospective
one.
of the Mummy.
Oh,
The
dude,
Mummy's awesome.
those like beetles crawling under their skins
Oh
like
yeah,
freaked me out as a kid, but I loved it.
I've seen the Mummy an ungodly amount of times. The one and two, I've
Classic.
seen Mummy Returns. Like I've seen those movies so many times. Um,
But you're right, and those felt like very much Indiana Jones style films, with where Brendan Fraser was very much an
Oh, yeah.
Indiana Jones person, right? Like he
yes.
was the leading man. He's kind of knowledgeable, and he's the only one that can figure out this great mystery and save the day, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean the characters are different, but
Yeah.
just the idea of you're going to multiple locations.
Yes.
It's in a different like time period that's not modern day.
Right.
And it's just got that swashbuckling, it's got that
Yes.
swashbuckling going
Yeah,
on.
you got a leading man
But
with confidence that's
yeah,
suave, but
it's got swagger, and but he's
yes.
like, let's go back to Indiana Jones. I mean,
Yeah.
just real quick, this is
Yeah.
just the series overall that Harrison Ford, he's got this charisma, and he's got this
Yes.
like whimsicalness of like accidents. It's like
Yeah.
that's how you do like good fantasy, good swashbuckling, and
Mm.
like Johnny Depp is
Yeah.
Captain Jack Sparrow is a good example of this, of like a character getting into a situation accidentally and then
Mm.
having a plan and then accidentally getting out of that problem, the new problem that comes from that new plan. That's how you
Yes.
do swashbuckling, right? It's like
Yes.
you're just like, it's a character stumbling through an action sequence. And it's not because of their intelligence or their ingenuity. It's because of their courage and their wit and their charisma.
Yeah.
And what's cool about Indiana Jones is, on the flip side, he's also a teacher, so he does have that intelligence level that's mainly for the softer, quieter moments.
Yep.
But Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, we've been dancing around it a little bit, but I do want to talk about the criticisms here, and these
Sure.
are valid criticisms. I think, and I'm just going to kind of list them off and just top level in my head. I think one, obviously, there's just certain sequences and kind of breaking the unbelievability of the world they're in, right? That you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like it feels like the old phrase "nuke in the fridge." That's what they call nuke in the fridge,
Yeah.
and that feels like, okay, not sure a man could survive. Not saying just I can buy the blast, but almost the landing of the blast.
Yeah, or just like the fridge being tumbled and tumbled and tumbled.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he just rolls out, and he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that was weird."
I think there is a weird thing too, that and the new one's going to do this too with like the space race, the time period, is that you have I know he goes up against Nazis,
Yeah.
and that's a very relevant human history thing, obviously. But I think it is kind of weird when you start having actual moments in history that it's like Forrest Gump. It's like Forrest Gump running
Yeah.
up into like, oh, I'm meeting the president of this time period. And I think when you
Right.
start doing that, I think you need to kind of like have elements of history with those kind of things, and not have actual real life moments being the nuke in the family,
Yeah.
that's a real thing that happened, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's an issue. Obviously, nuke in the fridge is to kind of breaking the reality of the world a little bit. But I can see a little bit of maybe them wanting to do that to kind of tee up the ending. Just when we'll get there.
Yeah.
So that obviously having Shia LaBeouf swing on the vines and be able to catch the motorcades as they're going down the jungle, that's a little,
Yeah.
it don't bother me that bad, but I totally see it. The use of CGI with like the gophers in the beginning and then the monkeys
Yeah.
later. The gophers
Yeah.
I hate. Like I hate the gophers. Like
Yeah.
they look so bad.
Yeah.
But so that, and then obviously the MacGuffin, right? And Indiana Jones is all about finding the treasure, the MacGuffin,
Right.
and it ends up being an alien, which I am obsessed with alien stuff.
Yeah.
But it is feel different when you have 3 movies that are about religious artifacts or things
Yes.
that are pertain to supernatural, and then you have
Right.
something that is more scientific, right? It's still supernatural in the fact that we don't understand how it's operating, but it's
Yeah.
scientific in nature. From like it's not, it
Like
doesn't feel like another entity doing it,
yeah,
right?
and it's weird because like I feel like on paper I really like the idea. Like on paper you're like, okay, let's take one of these like fantasy theories that like the Mayans had help building their stuff by aliens. Like that's a fan theory maybe that just floats around about history, and like I find those while I have no reason to believe them, they are like fun to think about kind of things, right?
Sure, they're all fun to
And
think
so I
about.
think, and Indiana Jones does that, right? They take these known legends or these known mysteries and kind of play them up. But it is different when we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant, which historically we have proof has existed, right? Like there's historic proof that this was probably a real thing. It's outside of just what the Bible says. At the same time, like the Temple of Doom. What was the MacGuffin in that one?
There's like these three ritual rocks.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But and so that one felt a little more vague, or just like kind of just came up with something. But then Temple of Doom, Last Crusade is again about the last cup of Christ that he used at the last supper, and so those versus an alien that helped the Mayans build their civilization thousands and thousands of years ago, those do feel a little more closer to reality, I think, for me, right? Like, okay, I can buy like
Specifically one
if
and
Jesus
three.
was
Yeah.
alive, I'm sure there's a cup somewhere that he touched that someone's been saving somewhere. You know what I mean? This kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I think it is like it's interesting because like on our way there, I'm kind of into the idea. I feel like, okay, yeah, this mysterious thing we're gonna, in the past. I mean, the past movies have basically given us reason to believe that deities exist, or at least one of them, right?
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
not that far fetched to believe that maybe aliens exist in this too. But maybe, I don't know what, maybe it's when we get there. I don't know if it's the design of the aliens or how they're revealed. It doesn't come together for me in a super satisfying way with the finale. And maybe it's difficult for me to parse exactly what doesn't get me there to really enjoy that part. It's almost more like I enjoy the lead up more than I enjoy the actual moment it happens.
I agree. No, I 100% agree. And I think it's multiple things. One, I'll say this: the mystery itself, they're doing very. And granted, I'm more into alien stuff than I am religious history. Like I
Right.
know more about aliens, like alien theories, than I do about the Bible.
Sure.
And so like for me, the Mitchell Hedges skull, they're doing the crop, like the basically signs what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like all those little things are like very top level. You Google alien theory, and it's like that's the first
Right.
5 things you're going to find, right? Maybe,
Yes.
sort of thing. So it kind of feels like that, which makes sense a little bit because you're wanting the general audience to kind of
Sure.
be familiar a little bit with kind of some of this history. I think that it kind of breaks down a couple ways. One, I think the skull being like a giant alien dome skull is not as
Yeah.
cool as being a human skull.
Yeah.
I think you could have had a human skull fit inside an alien head. You know what I'm saying? Like I think
Yeah.
making it oddly shaped like that for me, I don't know, this is nitpicking, but I think these little details kind of shape the overall thing.
I agree.
Having it be a human skull, that way it kind of keeps some of the mystery a little bit alive. I think that would have gone a long way. And I think also using them as CGI at the end when it's like going shoom, 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 shoom.
Yeah.
Having a CGI alien is just never fun, especially when you see a movie like E.T. or you see any of the movies pre-95, right? When you have like animatronics and it just looks like that's one of the cool things about Indiana Jones is they do have a lot of green screen and stuff, which
Sure.
I think people are too harsh on Kingdom's Crystal Skull sometimes with the CGI because I'm like, go back and look at some of the other stuff. Like it's not, they don't, no, the other 3 are not the best like CGI stuff of all time.
Right.
But I think I think you're right. The design of the alien, those kind of things. I think
it just
that
looks like such a basic bitch alien design, right? Like it's a tall, skinny thing with a long head, and like I even think that part felt a little bit just like, okay, like it's not visually interesting, maybe.
I like that. I just wish that it felt more tangible and real versus they're looking at a green screen kind of thing.
Yeah, and
Um,
almost like the fact that they weren't really they were interdimensional beings was almost like a little too like it's almost like just let them be aliens from outer space. I don't know. Like, it felt
they
like
are. I
it's
mean, they are. That's what alien. I mean,
well, but
I'm
no,
not
they
saying that's
went to
what.
the space between spaces, not the
Well, I'm
space.
not saying that's what aliens are because I don't know.
Sure, 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 sure,
But I am saying that's a perfectly fine. They're aliens. They're not
sure.
saying they're not aliens. But that's a perfectly
Yeah.
interesting idea of having like a scientific. If you could put like a
Mhm.
scientific thing on it, having this character
Sure.
say that to make it feel more real is. I think that's fine. I like it actually. Um, and I like that they're in the space between spaces. I like that idea. I like, um, it feels like I think that to me means they're transporting through like black
Yeah.
holes, basically. Yeah,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
that way we would almost imagine they would in real life now. Like they're not necessarily jumping in light speed. They're like
Right.
folding 2 points together and they're kind of
Right.
coming out the other point of that.
Right. Right.
So not to give you guys a scientific lesson on aliens. But I think what's weird to me, Daniel. Indiana Jones is one of the only movies that get a pass in this.
Hmm.
Is they essentially they don't have a big climactic fight at the end, or they don't have a big. They have fights and there's fights and punches, but they don't ever fight like a big bad at the
No,
end, right?
it feels like most of the time, like the finale is like the bad guy getting what they want and
Right,
it kills them.
right, yeah,
That's kind of like the big that those are like the
yeah.
big. It's
More
like
so 1, 3, and
it's
4, yeah,
it's
yeah,
like the bad guy versus the force of whatever they're trying to figure out, not Indiana. And it's Indiana Jones because of his knowledge or his like, history of knowing these things, knows how to get out of them alive because he knows like the rituals or whatever, right? Like he knows
mm-hmm.
he knows the he knows history and he knows the legends, and so he kind of is that's his secret power, is history, right?
Yeah.
It is interesting.
It,
You're right. It's not really like any other kind of actiony franchise. I feel like in that way that like what ends up saving the day is the power itself, is the thing that they're searching for so much of the time. Yeah, for at
yeah.
least like you said, 1, 3, and 4 for sure.
So it is kind of like there's this interesting analysis, not on just this movie, but kind of all of them of like
Yeah,
what's what are they going up? I mean, I know like and what in 4 it's they got to get the Russians want the skulls so they can control people.
right,
In 3 they want the cup so they can basically live forever, so the Nazis
right,
can basically build another regime, or
right.
to I guess for Hitler, or
Yeah,
maybe it's even the offshoot of Hitler. The first one, the
yeah,
same thing. Nazis want the Ark so they have full power,
yeah,
and normally it's power. It's power. It destroys it. You can't. The forces. Are destroying them themselves. I don't know. Just the interesting thing there that like I forgive that because I always want like the bad guy to fight or the good guy to fight the bad guy. There'd be a one
sure.
liner at the end. But yeah, I
There
think
usually is, but it comes out after the bad guy's dead. I feel like it's always like that kind of like I don't know. I still feel like we get one-liners in this. I feel
we
like
did. No, you
yeah,
do.
yeah.
You do.
It's just
I
different. It's not like you say the one-liner then kill the bad guy. It's like the bad guy
Yeah.
gets his just kind of like
Yeah.
he gets what he deserves, and then Indiana Jones has a quippy, sarcastic thing to say about it afterwards.
Yeah, man, I won't lie. I'm getting psyched for the new one. Like I
Yeah.
hope I don't get disappointed. I'm pretty excited for it. But
Yeah.
we're currently at a 66% on Rotten Tomatoes right now
That's
at the
up
time of
from
this
where
recording.
it was though. So
Was it
that's
50%? So I mean, it feels
yeah.
divided.
Well,
The
and
thing
the
is,
audience score will start coming in today, I guess maybe or by the weekend, maybe. I mean, I'm still
Tonight,
looking at some
tomorrow
today.
morning,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that will be very interesting to see how the audience feels about it. See if this is one where maybe the critics disconnect, but the audience enjoy it. I don't know.
Well, most people are saying it's better than Crystal Skull, and I like Crystal Skull, so I'm like,
So
well,
interesting because the reviews don't. I don't know if it's just like the nature. Maybe it's just the nature of reviews these days. There's just more reviewers than there was in 2008. I'm sure the amount of like podcast
definitely.
sites and YouTube reviewers and like new just fan sites that have become review like mainstays. So maybe even. I mean, it's hard to compare even a Rotten Tomato score from 2008 to a Rotten Tomato score in 2023. I feel like
No, it is.
They're not directly comparable. There's just a lot has changed about movies, about critiquing movies, all of it.
Yeah, well, Crystal Skull has a 77%, which is the lowest of those
Sure.
first four. It's tied with
Well, and
Temple of
that's so
Doom for
like, I mean,
77.
like, when they aggregate for old movies, are they finding old reviews? Is that how they do that? So like when they're doing the Rotten Tomato score for the first three Indiana Jones, are they using modern reviews of these? Or are they using like reviews that
The,
came out at the time?
we're using older ones, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it is beneficial for older films to have a higher rating because there's less reviewers for sure. If it's positive in general, then yes. I mean, like by the time this rolls out, Indiana Jones will have about 350 reviews, I think. Which we're like halfway at that point right now. So it could,
Yeah.
yeah, it could be between 250 to 350 is what it'll pan out to be.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I mean, look, overall, I get it. I get the issues with it. I get, I think if they just kind of replace some of the practical stuff and then kind of retweet some of the MacGuffin things,
Yeah.
um, I like that ends up being they're searching for knowledge. Like I like that, like the El
Yeah.
Dorado and this is what treasure was, is knowledge. I think it's a nice, it's a feel good kind of thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think everyone brings their A game acting. I think Spielberg
Yeah.
still at this point. I mean, you look at his later movies. Like I like Ready Player One a lot. Part of that is because of just nostalgia.
Sure.
Other part of that is because we were there and like we just
Yeah.
got there's memories tied to it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think like you look at this Spielberg, it totally trumps Ready Player One Spielberg in a billion different ways, right?
Yes. It
And
feels much more like classic old school Spielberg.
oh
Like
yeah,
in just the camera movements, the lighting, and just the way he frames Indiana. I think that even
yeah.
like the one of the most enjoyable parts of this movie is just seeing Harrison Ford as Indiana again, and kind of those
Yeah.
some of those classic sayings and the classic looks, the classic look how he gives underneath the brow of the hat. Like there's just some classic imagery that just gives you good shivers. You know what
Oh
I mean?
yeah.
And I am a little like I hope we get that as much in the new one, just because Harrison's older, and I just wonder, I just it just makes me nervous of like, will it still feel like Indiana Jones? Will it still feel
Yeah.
like this is our Indy? I don't know, because
Well,
it did feel like that in this one. It felt like that's my Indiana Jones, even if the movie isn't maybe as the plot isn't as great as some of the other ones. That still feels like Indy,
Yeah. No, I think all the reviewers at this moment are saying that Harrison brings it, and it is an older Indiana Jones. They do lean into that, like that. It's they
I hope
make
so.
light of it in this one, but it feels like they say it's a more of a plot point in 5. Like it's
I think
actually
it should be. I think if you're using what is he? He's over 80 now, and like
I think he's
I'm guess-
78 now. I could be wrong.
Okay, well, and I'm guessing he's like probably close to that age in the film. I don't know if they've done the math of like how old Indy is at this point, but
I think he's like in his mid 60s or something because
you're-
it's like it takes like 69, I think, or 50. It's during this NASA space launch.
yeah. So I mean, I feel like if you're gonna do an Indy
It's
this
59.
old, you've got to deal with his age and him not being able to do this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've got Nazis back, so it is cool
Yeah.
that every odd movie is Nazis.
And it's weird how it feels like right for them to be back now. Like it's like, oh yeah, Nazis are a current topic. We should deal with those again.
Yeah,
you know,
odd times.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think overall, I mean, I have it playing here on the side, so I keep glancing over, just seeing things. The movie's got a lot of heart, humor, and
Yeah.
spectacle, and
Yes.
I think it hits a lot of the things that I look for in a movie. And again, I like it. I think I have more fun with it than Temple of Doom. I think part of it too, Daniel, is I watch less critically acclaimed movies sometimes more than critically acclaimed, just because I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Like why is this? Where's the disconnect?
Sure,
So I'm like,
I get it.
so I'm always more fascinated by some of this kind of stuff.
That
But
makes sense.
overall, I really I love the movie still. Like I find a lot to enjoy about it. I've probably seen it more than I have the other 3 overall, just because I'm
Really?
constantly trying to figure out what's wrong with it
Yeah.
or the general consensus
Sure.
of it all.
Sure.
I want to say like my favorite moment in the movie, maybe one of my favorite moments. I love the opening. Not saying it peters out the opening, but I just want to say here's why I love Indiana Jones, and this is because of this moment. It's one of the moments in this movie anyway, is whenever he's they're driving in the warehouse.
Yes.
The two trucks are driving to each other, and he's like getting up, and you know he's fixing to whip the top of the
and
beam.
Max
And
like,
then
you don't know him.
you don't know him. You don't know him.
Yeah.
That's so good
Yeah.
because Indy's doing his thing,
Yeah.
and another character is telling the other guys
Yeah. Yeah.
about
you don't do
his,
this. Yeah.
about his character. And
Yeah.
it's a perfect way to explain a character.
Yeah.
And you have the character also doing something simultaneously, and he's not
Right.
explaining it himself.
Right.
And it's just like a perfect, like,
yeah.
that's Indiana Jones, is when
Yeah.
someone else is saying, fucking stop the truck because he's going to fuck us up. You know, like,
yeah. Yeah.
that's
I think
good.
I love the first chase sequence with Indy and Shia. I
It's
love
great.
the crawling through the cars and beating people up, and then the motorcycle gets on the other side and he crawls out the other side and gets on. It's just
great.
good stunt work. Like it's just like look. I mean, the guy that's the stunt. It's not Harrison Ford, obviously, but like he's like holding onto the motorcycle and just his feet are flat on the ground, like just scooting a lot. Like it just looks so fun and so like classical dynamic action scenes that are just like. You could do that. It's a car chase scene. It's one of the most common types of action scenes we have ever had in cinema. And yet this one finds a way to feel dynamic and exciting and fun. And that to me is like Indiana Jones. It's like these bombastic things that he does that are just like, no one would be able to do that or think of that. And yet he pulls it off with this kind of suave, nonchalant, like, I don't know, I was just winging it. You know, this kind of like, this, you know, and
accident.
I think
it's an accident. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I think Shia shines in that scene too. He feels like a good companion for Indy. And like this, he's cocky, but doesn't know as much, you know, he doesn't think school's important, you know, but he has so many of the intangibles that Indy has of just like, he's sure of himself and he's capable and he can think on his feet and he's, you know, all these kind of things. I just, that scene though, just so like, I was just kind of grinning the whole time. And I am not an action scene guy. Like most of the time, if it's a movie with a lot of action scenes, the action scenes are the most uninteresting part for me. But maybe it's just, it felt like so Spielbergian, so classical Hollywood and so Indiana Jonesy that we just don't get. I don't know. I just loved it.
No, I agree. I think when that sequence kind of ends when they slide under the library table, and it's like and everything's slowing down. The way the bike is actually slowing down, and then they're slowing down. It's like safely, and he gets up and he's like, "Oh, you need to." He's like, you know, he teaches the kid.
The one guy's like, Dr. Jones, I have a question.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Like,
it's great.
He's like asking a question about class. Yeah, I absolutely love it.
That's Spielberg, and that's and then also we got to give props, of course, to John Williams, the one man, you know. Amongst the director changes, amongst the franchise holdies like Disney and all these things, there's one man, Daniel, that's been holding the line the entire time, who has never disappointed us once.
Yeah,
and that's John Williams. Like
You're right.
He never has.
You're right. No, he's the GOAT of movie cinema scores. I don't know. I just don't think you can argue with that. How
can you?
He defined what like movie scores were.
Yeah.
And they're still like, even like Hans Zimmer is amazing, but we wouldn't have Hans Zimmer if we didn't have John Williams first. You know, he built on top of the things that John Williams first did and created.
At this point, it's the house that John Williams built. We're just all living in it.
Man.
All these other composers are living in it.
Yeah. And just think about like all the movies that he's been a part of would be like at least 25% not as good if it had not as good score. Like his scores, his scores are part of the reason Star Wars is Star Wars. You know what I mean? Like the music,
Jurassic Park,
Indiana Jones, all
Indiana
of it.
Jones.
I mean,
Jaws.
Like, yes. I mean, it's just like those movies aren't those movies without the score. And
Superman.
Yeah, no, I agree. I could talk about John Williams forever.
Oh, I could too. We need, you know, I'm going to tell you this. I could have saw him for his birthday last year, for his 90th birthday. And he played the first excerpt from Dial of Destiny.
Oh wow!
And I didn't go. I should have. I should have done it. Daniel. Yeah, I'm glad we talked about Indiana Jones. It feels like we're both more positive than the typical zeitgeist of the movie.
I think so. We also do, to be fair, have a lot of nostalgia for this character. So we have some rose tinted glasses, probably compared to people that didn't.
And
I
we
enjoyed
could
it. I'm
spend
fine with
another 2 hours just talking about the negatives. I
Mhm.
can absolutely.
Sure.
And I get it, people. I get it.
Yeah.
But I would suggest if you wanted like a break of some of these Marvel DC things
Yeah.
that feel like they're just kind of you're getting
Yeah.
the same thing over and over again, this movie it almost makes you appreciate it more. You're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
this is what
Yeah.
filmmaking is.
Yeah.
Even if it's not at the height of Indiana Jones was, it's still better than almost 99% what we're getting in the MCU.
It is
Period.
still a wholly classical film made by one of the greatest classical Hollywood directors has ever existed, with one of the best people that have ever done scores, ever existing, scoring it with one of the most prolific and famous and great actors in Harrison Ford. Like,
Yeah.
yes, the plot isn't as great to me. I agree. Some of the funny things that happen, sure, but you can't deny the talent that is in that movie and on display and doing their best. And so, like, if you want to watch, to me, like what feels like a classical Spielberg movie, I'd watch this over Ready Player One.
Sure. How can our listeners write into us, Daniel?
You can write into bit.ly/2for1mail. Let us know what you thought or think or have thought or now think about Indiana Jones and the Crystal Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I always skip Kingdom. I just do Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, which, to be fair, I honestly think that's better. They should have gone with that. It's much shorter and sweeter, and it still communicates the point. But let us know what you think. Were you a fan? Are you more on our side where you can forgive maybe some of the shortcomings because of everything else it brings? Or do you feel like this is an unworthy entry in the franchise? Let us know. bit.ly/241mail.
I have a feeling we're going to lose some subscribers over this one. Just the feeling. I hope we talk about Dial of Destiny sooner rather than later, Daniel.
Yes.
And if you can't write us at our bit.ly, you can always find us in the comment section below, youtube.com/Superman Again, the best place to consume the content. I'm glad we did it, Daniel.
Indeed.
I'm excited as we approach episode 170.
Yes.
Hopefully we have Dr. Bruce Hutchinson back. We have Dial of Destiny, Secret Invasion. We still got to talk about Across the Spider-Verse at some point. There's a lot to talk about, and we will be talking about it.
It's fun movie season.
It is. My name is Donovan Thompson.
I am Daniel Wingfield.
And we have spoken.